Today I'm going to be planting kale, which kale is one of the, number one, I love it. It's just a great food. It tastes good, specifically to me when it's cooked. I'm not really a big fan of raw kale. It's just not my thing, but nevertheless cooked, I love it. I could eat it every single day. This year I'm going to be growing 5 different varieties. I'm going to show you that. And I'm going to talk about specifically how to grow it, some of the things you might want to do as you're planting your kale. And let's talk about it a little bit. So kale is a part of the Brassica family, and that means that kale is the same species as broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower. All of these things, they can actually cross-pollinate, meaning they're basically the same kind of plant, and because of that, being in the same species, they can literally cross-pollinate, and so you're gonna get kind of a Frankenstein if you let them go to seed. But most of them actually don't go to seed the very first year. So for instance, like kale, it's a biennial, which means that you may plant it in the spring or you plant it in the fall and you just never see any seeds and you think, what on earth is happening here? And what it is that kale takes 2 years to get seed. So if you plant it 1 year, it's gonna make it through the winter in most places except for the very coldest places. It's actually gonna be able to stay through the winter, and you can be harvesting kale all winter long. That's one of the amazing things about kale. That's one of the reasons I love it, because I'm in zone 5, so we get pretty cold. We get down to 0 and below, and or for instance, kale can make it down to -10 Fahrenheit or something like -23 Celsius. So it gets really, really cold, and you can leave it out all winter and you can keep harvesting it. Now, once you get somewhere around the December point, there's not enough hours of daylight for it to actually grow. So it's not growing through the winter, but it's staying fresh. So leaving it outside is just great because you don't even have to take care of it at that point. You just, whenever you want it, you go out there and cut off some of the leaves, and if you leave some behind, what's going to happen is through the winter, it'll go dormant. So it will be out there and you can have as much as you need. And I would like to plant as much this year as I will need all through the winter, and then I can harvest the seeds or take the seeds next spring. I have some actually ready here, almost ready, not quite. The flowers are just coming out. I think I saw the very first flower, the beautiful yellow flower growing on my scarlet kale. Now that's from last year's planting, and so now this year I can actually harvest the seed. And I'll do another video in the future on harvesting the seeds or gathering seeds and saving them from your kale. One of the things about kale is how much nutrition. It's just packed with nutrition. It has a good amount of things like calcium. It has like 700%, nearly 700% of your vitamin K. It has over 200% of your vitamin A, and it has over 100% of your vitamin C. I mean, you don't normally think, we always think of things like citrus fruit, like oranges. That's where we get our vitamin C. But the great thing is you can get it from kale. So you don't have to be able to grow fruit trees like that to be able to get it. You can simply get it all winter long from your kale. You may have heard of what's called the ANDI score, which is the Aggregate Nutrient Density Index. And Joel Fuhrman, if I understand correctly, was kind of he's the one who birthed this idea of the ANDI score. And what it is looking at an aggregate of nutrition in plants and deciding, okay, what has the most nutrition, and maybe even looking at various things like antioxidants and various minerals and vitamins. And there's basically 5 at the top of the list with 1,000, meaning that's the highest score you could possibly get. And one of them is kale. You have kale, collards, watercress, and 2 others in there. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but meaning kale's unbelievably nutritious. So it's a great thing to eat. You can either boil it. It's actually been shown to be very beneficial to actually steam it. So that's a great way of cooking it. But why am I standing here in front of a big pile of dirt? Well, this isn't actually simply dirt. This is one of my piles of compost here. It's just, compost is such a great thing. So last year I put in here kind of our veggies and our fruit, the remainder of what was left over. I also throw in the clippings from my yard. I don't use any pesticides on my yard, and so I wouldn't worry about that. But you smell it and it has that beautiful earthy smell. And the reason I'm standing in front of this is because kale is a heavy feeder. What does that mean for some of you who may not be conversant on all the terminology in gardening? You have basically heavy feeders, kind of medium feeders, and light feeders. Some of the lighter feeders might be things like carrots and potentially even potatoes, even though these things may grow better and decent amounts of nutrients in the soil. But kale and the brassicas actually need a lot of nutrition, specifically nitrogen. And this is something you're going to get plenty of by having a bunch of compost. Now, I don't have the best soil. I have very, very sandy soil, kind of ridiculously sandy soil. So I have to add something to it. You could add something like manure to your soil. Once again, you don't just throw fresh manure onto a garden. You need it to be well composted, just like you typically don't throw some banana peels into your garden. You throw them on the compost pile, they break down, and then you use them. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be adding the compost to the soil so that it will give that good nitrogen and the other nutrients and micronutrients to the soil. It also helps give a bunch of the good bacteria that you're going to get that helps break down the food and vegetable matter that was thrown into here. And so I'm going to be putting that in the soil, and I'm going to do that now, and I'm going to then go over and begin to plant my kale seeds. Like I said, this year I am growing 5 different kinds of kale. I'm going to grow red Russian. I will also do white Russian. Both of these ones are by Johnny Selected Seeds. They are a very reputable company. You know what you're getting there, and you're going to have almost guaranteed germination rates, at least high germination rates with Johnny's. And you hopefully will most of the time with Baker Creek, but not always. But they'll have some varieties that you're not going to be able to get with Johnny's. And Johnny's, a lot of them, you're not going to be able to have the open pollinated or the so-called heirloom varieties. Both the varieties that I have from Johnny's are open pollinated, meaning you can save the seeds from them. And obviously you're going to have the heirloom varieties from Baker Creek. And so I'm going to do the Kale 1000 head. These ones are just ridiculously large. There's also the blue curled Scotch and the dazzling blue. So I'm going to grow each one. So you have what are called open pollinated seeds. They're kind of common man calls them heirloom seeds. And then you have hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds are if I would take 2 varieties like dazzling blue kale and blue curled Scotch, I'd grow them right next to each other and take the pollen from one and put it on the pollen of the other, save the seeds from that. That next generation seed, when I plant them, will be what is called a hybrid. But I don't want hybrids. I want open pollinated varieties. I want ones where I know I'm planting blue curled Scotch and I'm gonna get blue curled Scotch. And the way you do that is, if I'm planting these, I only want to save one variety, allow one variety to go to seed or go to flower, and then ultimately to seed. And that way, if I only save one kind of a brassica each year, you really need like a half a mile distance. I live way out in the forest, so it's not trouble for me. My neighbor is far enough away. He's not quite a half a mile away, but the point is he's far enough away with the trees between that I'm good, but I can only save one brassica a year. And the good thing is the seeds will last a few years anyway. But the point is, I'm going to grow 5 this year, but I'm only going to allow one of them to go to seed, and that's going to be the one that I like the best. Well, I already have behind me here some of the red Russian, so I'm going to save the seed from that one. So I won't save the seed from the red Russian next year. I'll pick another variety, and then I can have whatever varieties that I want to grow. So I'll find out which one I like the best this year, and then I'll save that until next year. It'll grow again next spring. I'll be able to keep harvesting the leaves all through next spring. Really, you can keep them all growing through the winter, and then as spring is coming along and you start seeing the flowers, before the flowers start coming out, you just hack the tops of them off, or you just uproot the plants in the spring, and then you'll be able to harvest all the way along. But you only save one so that you don't cross-pollinate and change up what you're trying to save. A few things to know, when you're planting kale, depending on your soil, you want to plant them either closer or further together. Most people are going to want to plant them about 18 inches apart, and then the rows are going to be anywhere from 18 to 36 inches, depending on how good your soil is. And one of the things that's really good to know is some spacings. Now, if you want to be very particular, you can always set up some stakes at the ends of your rows and put some string across, and you'll have perfectly straight lines. That's the nicest way of doing it. I do things pretty simple. And so you can do a few things, like for instance, I've measured my hand from here to here is about 4 inches, and a span from here to here is just over 8 inches. So if I don't stretch all the way, that's 8 inches. And from the tip of my elbow to the top of my hand is 18 inches. And that's called a cubit in Bible times. And so I have that 18 inch. So if you're wanting 18-inch rows, I can simply put my arm down, and with my hand, because I have these nice little rows, I actually make the spacing just like this. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put some soil, or not soil, I'm gonna put my compost right on each one of those lines, and I'm gonna put it right in there. So I'll do that just now, just to give you an idea. You can put the compost all over. I'm really, because I wanna save as much compost as possible, I'm actually gonna put it on each line. It's easier just to put it everywhere, to be honest with you, but I'm gonna kind of top dress it and I'll mix it in, and that's actually where I'm going to be planting. You can see my line here, and you can see it over here now, basically roughly 18 inches apart, and I'm going to be dumping some of my compost right on each line. The more you put, the better, obviously. Got some grass in there. The more the better. So whatever amount you have to spare, and I only have so much, so I've got to be a little choosy with what I do have. But you could grow in 100% compost if you wanted to, and that would be even better. But most of us can't do that. Now, if I had been home, I would have actually planted these in the house. I would have had my trays and I would have done that, but I've been gone for most of the last 2 months. And so I have to direct seed at this time. And if you're going to do it in your seed trays in the house, you might only do 2 seeds per actual cell. But when it comes to outside, just to be safe, you probably want to do 3 or 4 seeds every 18 inches, and you want to put them down roughly a ½ inch deep. So you're going to grab 3 seeds every 18 inches, and what you're going to have to do once you've planted them, once they start growing, if you have multiple plants growing, you're going to want to come back and you're going to have to actually snip off one of the pieces of kale that's growing. And I know if you're not used to it, you might feel bad, but that's just simply what you got to do, because you don't want to crowd the roots. So what I'm doing is making it real simple. So the last thing that I'll have to do is come back and water this, and then hopefully in several days we'll have our sprouts beginning to come forth. Well, that's basically it. This is one of my favorite things to grow, just because it's so simple, it grows so well, and it has so much nutrition, and it grows year round. I mean, at least where I live, very few things, there are a few things that actually do grow year round, like parsnips and obviously kale, and you can even keep carrots in the ground in the winter. So there are certain things you can do, but that's just one of the great things. You can be making soups, or you can just simply, cook it in the winter, however you want to do it. It's totally enjoyable, filled with nutrition. It just simply makes you feel better. So if you like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notifications, and we got plenty more videos on gardening, homesteading coming up. God bless and have a fantastic day.